Good morning, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. Thank you for joining us with another installment of our Understanding Our New World series. We're fortunate today to be joined by the Illinois House Republican leader, Jim Durkin. Representative Durkin is from a western suburb of Chicago, attended ISU, which we'll talk about, attended John Marshall Law School, entered the Illinois General Assembly in 1995, and became the Illinois House Republican leader in 2013. Representative Durkin, it's great to have you with us. Thank you so much.
John, my pleasure. And I wish I was there in person, and I hope that you'll extend that opportunity to me when we ever get back to normal. But I'm glad to be part of this discussion today. I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, you were here several years ago, and we'd like to get you back when circumstances allow. Well, Representative, there's a lot of issues to talk about, but let's talk maybe a little bit about your background. Sure. You're, as I mentioned, from the western suburbs of Chicago, Westchester, one of 8 boys. I had the good fortune to go to college with one of your brothers and knew that I recall the family being very.
And you're still smiling too after you said that.
Right. And I remember he was particularly interested in politics and Chicago politics. So was that something you grew up with? Just a love and interest.
It was. I come from I have a great family. I'm very fortunate to have. I have 7 brothers, and we all get along. We still do. And in this days, sometimes you don't hear about that. There can be some friction sometimes, but we get along tremendously and famously. We live in the suburbs. We're all getting older, but we grew up in Westchester in my parents moved out of the west side of Chicago in the early 60s, moved out to Westchester, and quickly raised 8 boys who went to the same grammar school, same high school. All of us graduated from college, and 5 of us are practicing attorneys in the state of Illinois. And as my father would say, that I've got 5 lawyers and I got 3 sons that have real jobs. So, but they worked extremely, this was a generation that gave everything to their kids. And I hope that we can look back and see and just when we're adults, I'm a parent, I'm a grandfather now, but just remember what our parents did for us. And, those are just great ways to look at the future and it molds into your thought process on a lot of things. So, but growing up with 8 boys, my father was very successful. He was a great accountant, but the thing is, everything was spent on education. I don't recall ever owning a suit until I was in my early 20s. Everything I lived on hand-me-downs. And we'd have 2 seatings at dinner, one for the boys. And my parents finally said, I can't eat with you guys. You guys are, I've seen more manners by the animals at the zoo eating than I've seen with you guys. So you guys are on your own. So, but we get along. We talk a lot about law and about the process. But I came from a family that my father was a labor accountant, and we were naturally kind of inclined to be working on Democrat politics. And I had a brother, Terry, who you went to college with, was very involved with the late Richard J. Daley and also Michael Belandic. And then Rich Daley, the state's attorney. And I was, by just virtue of having an older brother involved with politics, I was walking precincts, passing out literature, running errands, doing all the grunt work for campaigns back when I was a teenager. And, but some years later, all of a sudden, I became a Republican. And when I really started thinking about my future and what I identify with, my attitude changed. My family is still kind of like in the middle. They're centric on issues. I would say many of them are still labor Democrats. I've got a brother who's a personal injury lawyer, but I think that we identify in a lot of things. So, but it was an interesting experience growing up, because everybody thought when I started in the legislature, this Republican comes from this labor Democrat family. We can't trust him. So I had to prove myself.
Well, so when you went to ISU and studied criminal justice, were you thinking of a career in law or politics, or were you sort of open to both possibilities?
Oh, well, you know what? I was interested in being a police officer, as most of my brothers who were lawyers all wanted to be police officers. But as the story goes, my father's first cousin was the chief homicide detective for the Chicago Police Department for many years. And then when my brothers would say that, you know what, when they graduated from college, they say, you know, I want to be a police officer, my dad would whistle one of us over, have lunch at a restaurant in Chicago called the Italian Village. And he says, I want you to talk to my cousin, Bill Keating, who was the head of the homicide division. Then he would go in and say, why do you want to be a police officer? It is a tough job. It's horrible. Why don't you go to law school instead? So it started with my oldest brother, Tom, had lunch with Bill Keating and my dad at the Italian Village. And then all four of us in a row went through the same drill with my dad and Bill Keating. And they were eventually taught us from, not that it's a noble profession, being a police officer. I have so many great friends in there, but they said it's a very tough life. Think about something else. And my father wanted us to go further with our education. So, but each one of us sat down with Bill Keating and my dad at the Italian Village, all five of us. And when we were all talking about being police officers, eventually the discussion about going to law school happened. So that's how it happened. But, you know, I grew up watching my brothers in courtrooms at the federal courthouse in Chicago, but also at the Cook County criminal courthouse, referred to as 26 in California. And I was fascinated by the job. And I remember when I was young going down and sitting and waiting in line to witness and watch the John Gacy trial. So I guess it's something that I was always interested. My brothers brought me down one day and I was just fascinated with the process of what their responsibilities were as prosecutors and what the defense attorney's obligations were. And it's something that I started thinking about, you know, even though I wanted to be a police officer, but that was always in the back of my mind, can I do this work? And I eventually did. I became a prosecutor in Chicago.
Well, tell us how that work as a prosecutor has shaped your political views. How has that influenced you?
Well, you know what? I left the state's attorney's office in Cook County, and I would say that obviously criminal justice and public safety is something that has always been, and it continues to be my priority, because I believe it is our greatest responsibility towards our citizens is to keep them safe, even in the most dangerous of times. But you've got to be able to work and develop policies which turn into law on how we are able to ensure that we have a system of due process, you know, that we are able to seek the truth. I look at my days when I was a prosecutor where I was trying 2 or 3 bench trials a day, maybe a jury trial every month, if not more bench trials, but I was on my feet arguing motions, trials, and it's a great learning experience. But what it gives me, and it's still to this day, I think the value that I provide to the House of Representatives is that, yes, I was a criminal prosecutor, but I'm also a civil lawyer. And I know that we pass laws that somebody in a courtroom is going to have to try to figure out what exactly was the legislature thinking when they did this. So I will often talk to people who are passing laws that affect the civil justice or the criminal justice system, whether it's rules of evidence or procedure. And sometimes the sponsors of the bill don't have a legal background or training, or even if they have, they've never had to go in a courtroom. So I want to be able to at least use my perspective and my experience to try to determine what is the practitioner, the attorneys and the judge, what did the legislature try to do? I'll remember when I was at the state's attorney's office, we would get a list of new bills and we would just scratch our head and say, what the heck are they thinking about? These guys have any clue about what we have to do in a courtroom every day? So I try to use that same attitude. And when I question individuals, it wasn't committee, I don't go into committee too often, but when I'm on the floor of the House of Representatives, whether if it is on a criminal justice bill or a civil justice bill, or, you know, laws are meant to be interpreted. I will even go further than that and just kind of play it out and create a scenario which would trigger a law that we are trying to pass and walk through and see how it's actually going to apply to the people that are in front of a judge trying to make, or in front of an administrative agency. So I think that my background of growing up, going to school with the Socratic method, so to speak, asking individuals, this sounds great on its face, but let's take a look and see how this will have a practical implication within our court systems and everyday life. And that's what I believe my experience from being a lawyer, but mainly as a prosecutor, asking these questions, somebody who had to be in a court day in and day out, that gives me a great perspective. And I think that I do get respect from members both sides of the aisle on issues of mainly criminal justice, but also civil law. Because I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a new colleague, a Democrat, some 7 years ago, who introduced her first bill, and I had to deal with an auto theft issue. And I was just looking through it, and I said, look, I want to talk to you for a second. I don't want to embarrass you because I can, with a lot of questions on the floor. I said, I'm going to just give me 24 hours and I'm going to rewrite your bill and it'll be in a good form. So I did that for that representative, and I saved her the embarrassment of having to go through a very difficult time on the floor of the House of Representatives because the way it was drafted didn't make any sense. So that's an example of what I think that I've brought to the process. But I will say that sometimes I get, I get my dander up and I will let it loose on the floor of the House of Representatives of what I think about certain pieces of legislation that are not only poorly drafted, but actually have no common sense, value at the end of the day. So.
Well, let's talk about the first phase of your career, because from 95, you entered the House, and then you served for several terms, and then you ran against Senator Durbin.
Oh, you remember that?
Well, but I mean,
I'd love to talk about that, though. It's good.
But I'd be interested in just what you're a smart, savvy guy. You knew that running against a well-funded, popular incumbent had some risk factor associated with it.
I definitely did factor risk in that, yes.
So how did you come to the conclusion to run, and how do you remember that campaign?
Well, you know what? I started in 95, and I was just awed by the experience. And I had, that was the one time that Republicans actually had control of the House of Representatives. It was in 95 and 96 under Lee Daniels was the Speaker, and Michael Madigan was the minority leader. So it's been a number of years, but I was there for it. But I have, like I said, I have a brother that was very involved in politics and had known people, my brother Terry, on the national level. And he was working for a number of, I would say, people on the Washington side. He became friends with Phil Gramm. He was a senator out of Texas. Phil Gramm had considered ran for president at one time. But you know what, you get into government and sometimes you think, I like what I'm doing, but maybe there's another thing that I can do. Everybody has, they have aspirations. But I wanted to be the guy that a lot of people down in Springfield say, I can do this, I can do that, but they never pull the trigger. So I had developed a friendship with, through my brother, with U.S. Senator John McCain back in the late 90s. And John McCain I had known about, but he said, my brother has good instincts. He says, you might want to get to know him a little bit. I know people that are very close to him. I think he's running for president. It would be a good experience for you to take a look at this and maybe get involved. So this is in like 1997. And I got to meet John McCain first time at a dinner in the city of Chicago. And, I had done my due diligence on him, and I'm in the presence of one of the, the greatest heroes of this country's ever known. But I was fascinated by his wits, but also his appreciation for this country and its values. And I just started developing a relationship with him. And before I know it, he's running for president. And his campaign people call my brother up and they call me. We don't have anybody in Illinois to run a campaign. And I'm like, I don't know how to run a presidential campaign. So, but at the time it was Governor Bush, John McCain were the leading members, and the whole establishment went with Governor Bush. So I think that my thought was running a campaign. All right, well, I just got to show up at things and, just maybe do a couple interviews. It was a little more involved in that. I found that out after he announced that you have to be able to put his name in the ballot, and that requires thousands of signatures, but you have congressional districts where that's where it really counts, because you have to get delegates to run in each one of the congressional districts, and also alternate delegates. You have to get their names in the ballot, and then you have to go get signatures. And that wasn't easy, but I was able to get Senator McCain on the ballot against Governor Bush on the last day, 5 minutes before the State Board of Elections office closed, because I was still collecting signatures and people who were helping me out up until the last moment. And McCain always joked and said, I'll never forget it, Jim. You're the only crazy person in Illinois that supported me in my first election. That's the type of humor he had. So I became friends with him. I got involved in a couple of really, really important issues in Springfield. And I thought that maybe this was an opportunity for me. I had done 4 terms, and the state party chairman at that time, his name was Richard Williamson. He was a former ambassador to the UN for Bush. He was the state party chairman, and he said, Jim, you ought to take a look at this Senate race. I think that you've done some things. You're a young guy. A lot of people, when they're in your position, they want to say they want to take their shot. And I looked at this point, I had worked on a couple tough issues, and I was given some good applauds by the local media and newspapers on criminal justice reform, but having a relationship with John McCain was something that was important. So I went out to Washington, spoke with John McCain, and I asked him if he would support me, and he said he would. And I'm like, this is a moment in my lifetime that I should just take my shot. I know I'm running up against a lot of money and also someone who's been well established within the state of Illinois and Washington. So I ran against Senator Durbin. I ran in a primary, was interesting, against Jim Oberweis, his first run for public office. And also a gentleman by the name of John Cox, who was the owner of Jay's Potato Chips. So these guys had a lot of money. John Cox also, just a few years ago, was the Republican nominee for governor against Gavin Newsom in California. So there's this guy in his 36 years old, 37 years old, and I got married. I got a little baby and 3 stepdaughters, and I'm running against 2 multimillionaires, and I got no money. So I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of it? And Dennis Hastert, remember that name? He supported Jim Oberweis after telling me he was going to support me. There's a long story there, but I don't think we need to get into it. But there's some irony and karma that goes into that. But he was not truthful to me in my primary. I ended up working extremely hard. I drove around the state of Illinois in an SUV. These guys were flying jets everywhere. And I was just picking off newspapers left and right, getting their endorsements, working with my colleagues, getting their support, and built up a really good grassroots operation in my primary. With spending, I think at the end of the day, my primary spend was $300,000 for a U.S. Senate race, while the other 2 guys spent anywhere from $3 to $4 million each. So on election day, I prevailed with 48% of the vote against those 2 guys. And I was really happy with the result, but it was hard work. Senator Durbin was a whole different story. Illinois is a blue state, and it was midterm, and I was not able to get the traction out of Washington. The polling, sometimes it was good, but there was a calculated decision made by the Senate Republican Campaign Committee is that the Illinois market, television markets and St. Louis markets are too expensive. We have other states where we need to make the investment, which are much more economical, and we've got a better chance of winning. So I debated Senator Durbin and on 3 or 4 different occasions. I was able to secure the endorsements of the major newspapers in Chicago and also the state of Illinois against Senator Durbin, but I didn't win. And I learned something very valuable from that, and that was I spent so much time driving around the state of Illinois, meeting people and going to locations that I've never even knew existed. And to me, that was extremely important and a growing experience for me. Understanding the different regions of the state and understanding what priorities that they have. Because I live in the suburbs, I've lived there my whole life. And the things that we look at, whether it's Second Amendment or business issues, they're extremely different in different parts of the state. And I have to be able to respect those attitudes. And that's something when I ran for leader of the House of Representatives, I told people that, I live in the suburbs. People think that we all have a different way, we have a way of looking at life. And I said, we probably do. But the thing is, I've traveled the state and I understand the regional differences and priorities. And that's going to make me a more rounded person in my position as a Republican leader. So I will say that my run against Senator Durbin, I'm glad I did it. I got it out of my system. But I also believe it's important that you run a race that's positive, and that you need to look back and see whether or not you did the right thing and that you acquitted yourself properly, meaning that you didn't take the low road, because I don't like that. So since then, Senator Durbin and I have become pretty good friends. We talk occasionally. When I go out to Washington, D.C., he and I will meet up for a drink. We go out to dinner. And when he comes in Springfield, I'll spend time with him. And that's not something I wish more people would have, that type of attitude with a person that they got clobbered by in a race. But that's how I look at this. And so I believe that, you win with addition in anywhere in life. But this is a situation that my friendship with Senator Durbin is something that it's genuine. And I have respect for him. He has respect for me. And we ran positive races. And I think that he was caught off guard that I was able to win some endorsements that he was expecting. So at the end of the day, that race gave me a very good foundation for me to serve and return back to the legislature. When I returned a few years later and the opening for the House of Representatives Minority Leader came, it gave me a good platform. Having run a race, a tough race, but also understanding the state of Illinois and how vast it is, but also how diverse it is. But more importantly, making sure that I respect the priorities of the different regions of the state and what people think about. And I think that I do that. And that's what's given me the opportunity to, I think, be a fairly balanced person in my position in the House of Representatives. Now, I'm talking too much, John. And
let me just play off that, because that actually takes us to where I hope to be, which is your conception of the job of House Republican leader. I mean, it seems like there's a certain array of issues in which the imperative is to find common ground. There seem to be some issues where the imperative is to just be, full-throated vocal opposition, and there are other issues in which you need to put together a comprehensive alternative to what the Democrats propose. So let's maybe go through these kind of three contingencies. In terms of areas of common ground, what are some of the policies or some of the issues where you think that there is common ground between the two parties in Illinois now?
Well, let me tell you about, now remember, I've served under three governors: Pat Quinn in his last year and a half, Bruce Rauner for 4 years, and now J.B. Pritzker. I will say the biggest areas that I've been able to reach common ground with Speaker Madigan and at the time President Cullerton was quickly after I was appointed and voted in as minority leader was pension reform. And that was something that was failed by the Supreme Court, ruled against it, but that was something that we were able to find common ground. I would say since under Governor Rauner, there was, at least in the beginning, some collective effort to be able to find resolutions to some of our budget issues and also business reforms, but that quickly went away. And it was a very divisive time in Illinois. Budget, we operated without budgets. We had the impasse. There was a lot of friction, a lot of personalities involved. And I'm afraid that we were not able to accomplish a lot of things that I think we had opportunities to do that. Both sides bear responsibility for it. And it wasn't Republicans, it was both Republicans and Democrats dug in. And I think that there was a very, very, very strong personality conflict between Governor Rauner and Speaker Madigan. And that got in the way of trying to negotiate a budget, trying to figure out what we can do with our deficit, trying to ensure that public education was going to be properly funded, but also we lose track of the business development, and also what we need to do is figure out ways to foster job growth in Illinois. And that was 4 years in which really we were stuck in neutral. So Governor Pritzker got elected. I made a commitment to my members that, this is a new day. We have a new governor, we have new challenges, and I wanted to give this new governor every opportunity to work with us, to show people in the state of Illinois that the past is something which we're not going to revisit. And the first budget under the governor, and it came together rather quickly, but Republicans were kind of left out in the lurch a little bit. Myself and Senate Leader Bill Brady, up until the month of May, and that's when a lot of the action really happens in Springfield. But the governor was, he wanted to get Republicans involved with the budget. It was important that if we were going to do a budget, that it is actually balanced. There's a lot of budgets that have been passed over the years that are not balanced, and that creates deficits. So it was important for us that if we were going to do a budget, that we would have a balanced budget. But we also felt that if we were going to have skin in the game and if we were going to be asked to support a Democrat governor's budget, that we have some priorities of our own that we need to have incorporated. So as the month of May went along, it was not only a budget, but there was a cry for a large-scale capital funding program. And that would require an increase in the gas tax, but also massive expansion of gaming. These are, these have been talked about for so many years, and putting them all together and trying, and without having competing interests pull votes away, and which often happens in these situations, but also when you're asking for a gas tax, it's very difficult to be able to find votes. But I was committed towards working with this governor and working with him to put Republicans on a budget. Our budgeteers and myself came to the conclusion at the end of the day that we think that we can find a balanced budget, but in exchange for Republican votes to be part of the budget, but also the capital program and the gaming expansion, we had a list of 7 business reforms that we thought were important. And I told the speaker that the week before, that if you want Republican participation in this budget, I have 7 items, and I'm not taking 5 out of 7, it's 7 out of 7. So I was led to believe that last week, up until the last day, that there was no appetite with the Democrats to accept any of these business reforms. And I told them on a last day of session, on a Friday, having a meeting with the 4 legislative leaders, I was asked if I had votes for the capital program and also the budget. And I said, well, where are you at with my business reforms? And I was told that the governor has rejected them. And I said, fine, this meeting's over. I'm not gonna, it's a two-way street. This is the last day of session. So I'm waiting, like, how's this gonna play out? And I'm like, well, I'm gonna give the governor a call in a couple hours. I'm just gonna wait a little bit. Put a call into the governor. He called me back a little bit later in the afternoon. He just said, look, could you, I had left the Capitol. I was ready to change because I thought our work was over. So could you come back to the Capitol? This is about 5 o'clock at night. So I sat with him and I went through what my caucus asked me to support. And he said that let's go through it. I think we got about, many of the things that you have talked about are things that we can take on right now. Other ones I think I need to think about over the next, we can deal with them in November. I said, I'm sorry. I have 7 items here. We've been at this for about a week and a half. People know it. It's no secret what we're trying to accomplish. And I said, if you want my votes, I need each and every one of these reforms that we've asked for. And so I got into one of the most intense schizophrenic moments in my life on the last day of session, from first meeting with the governor at 5 o'clock in the morning, and then having 5 o'clock in the evening, and then having at least 6 or 7 meetings between that time and roughly 10:30 at night between Madigan and Cullerton and the governor, back and forth, and of the budget, the capital program. And eventually the governor said, I accept each and every one of your reforms. And I was told by the Democrats, we need X amount of votes from you on the budget, gas tax, and also gaming. And I spent, and we're going to go into session the next day. We are now in overtime. So the vote threshold increased. So, and of course made my job a little more difficult, but I spent that whole night. And actually there was an end of session party, and I was there walking around with my notepad and my caucus sheet and finding people and asking, can you vote for this? And I mean, so myself and a couple of other guys from my caucus, we spent the whole night and all morning sounding the alarms, putting our votes together. So we started the votes on that next day for the budget, mid-afternoon. And I was working on getting my proportionate share of the votes, which I agreed to, up until the time that the bill was called for a vote. And that happened on each and every one of those bills that were separate. Gaming, the capital spending program with the gas tax, and also the budget. So I will say I've never, it was putting together a budget, gaming, and a $40 billion capital program, something that has been very elusive for years and not only decades. But we're able to accomplish it because there was, even though we could have gone and done this a little earlier in session, but I had 36 hours to be able to put my votes together and to help pass a budget with Republicans that was going to fund a large jobs program. And I will say that I'm talking a lot, but I will say that I will never forget that moment. It was probably one of the most schizophrenic moments of my life, but I knew that there was a lot at stake, and this is part of the job. You got to move quick. You've got to be able to think quick. You've got to rely upon your staff to be able to help execute on issues of that nature. But as I said earlier, for me, after having 4 years of impasse, I wanted people to understand that this new governor can work with Republicans, and that there are things that we can find a common ground on. So we did that last session, and it's extremely important. I want to give a new governor a shot. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's what I did this last year, in 2019. This year it was a little different.
Well, let's talk about this year, because obviously, COVID-19 changed everything for everyone. And let's talk a little bit about that, because the governor, obviously this virus, descended on the state early in the year. By March, the governor took a number of steps to effectively close down much of the state, for obvious reasons. And then, has slowly relaxed some of the restrictions. Some Republicans have been critical of him, saying he tightened up too harsh and then it was too slow to loosen things up. Of course, the example in other states showed just utter chaos. And as you look back now, do you think that the governor had a relatively balanced approach as you look at what's happened across the country?
Well, I remember when the governor first indicated to me that he was going to sign an executive order that was going to put the restrictions, I think it was a stay-at-home order or whatever, I forgot what it was, shelter-in-home or shelter-in-place order. It seems like it was a long time ago. And I agreed with him on it, because I knew that the virus is not something, I think it's for real, and we had to see if we could stop the spread of it quickly. And I supported him on that. But I also was hearing from the people in the retail industry, small businesses, and they were upset, but they understood it for that 30-day period, that we need to be able to tighten things up, shut things down, because we've got to, try to contain this virus. And we get into the next phase of it, and I see all of a sudden this incredibly dramatic, these applications that are going in the Department of Employment and Security. We had probably over 1 million Illinoisans who had lost their jobs within about 2 months. And I told the governor, I said, Governor, we've gone past 30 days. We can still manage and do everything we can to protect the health and safety of individuals in Illinois, but we cannot disregard the economic climate of what has happened. Work with the Restaurant Association, work with the retailers. And there are some things in there that I just didn't agree with the governor after I found out after the executive order. Everybody knows the small businessmen and women they have in their communities. It's not the mom and pop, hardware store, but it's restaurants. And I just really had a very difficult time understanding the logic of keeping a Target or a Walmart open that didn't have any type of restrictions on them at first with any type of requirement of face mask. But the small mom and pops couldn't open their store. They were determined to be non-essential. And to me, that's where the governor made a mistake, that we allowed these large, big boxes to never stop operations at all. He could have found a common ground with the hospitality industry. That's where most of our jobs have been lost. It's been in the restaurants and the people who live check and week by week. There's highs and lows. I commend the governor for doing what he did initially, but I don't believe that he's worked enough with the National Restaurant Association, the national retailers, to find back 2 or 3 months ago when the damage was occurring on our on the economy of Illinois, to find a common ground to be able to ensure that the businesses would be able to maintain a high level of health and safety, but allowing them to keep their cash registers open. And that's where I disagreed with the governor. And at the same time, I was critical, and I still am critical of the way that the Department of Employment and Security has handled these unemployment claims. The governor and his administration, with the stroke of a pen, put about 1 million people out of work. And they meaning the Department of Employment and Security, was not able to keep up with the demand. And I understand that, that's just a unfortunate situation, but they should have known about that ahead of time, that this was going to be a natural consequence and they would have to beef up the unemployment agency in Illinois. So, so I would say that it's, we're getting into the issue of the governor continues to operate under executive authority. And I was fine with it. I know that he has that statutory right. He did that back in March. But as we continue on and the governor is making decisions which I believe are more in the province of the legislature, it does concern me that the governor is overstepping his authority, his executive authority, without having the legislative body who we all recognize as are co-equals under separation of powers be part of this process. Now, we went back in for 3 days in May, which was a very interesting experience. But it was an it was a special session that was limited towards COVID-related issues, which can be interpreted in a number of ways. But we had a lot of issues that we still were working on that had never been addressed. The budget was passed. It was some $5 billion out of balance. We didn't take up important issues that we were working on up until the time of the COVID came, we were dealing with COVID, and that was ethics reform and also property tax relief. And right now, ethics reform is more front and center because of the scandal going on with Commonwealth Edison and also public official A. The governor is asking us to do more things, asking our members of a small committee called the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules to adopt his executive orders and rulemaking that are, I think, continuing to enter into the province of the legislative process. So we are now in August. The governor is asking the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules to impose penalties upon individuals who are not going to wear a face mask in establishments, whether it's restaurants or stores. And this seems like a repeat from a few months ago. This is a legislative prerogative. And so the governor needs to call us back into session. I'm prepared to go back down to do things that, he shouldn't be doing. So I will say that he has handled the COVID issue as well as anybody could under these situations, but it's the extension of his authority and power under his executive branch. I think that he's overextended himself, but he's missed out on a couple big opportunities too for us, which are important to people in Illinois, which we should have addressed back in March. And as I mentioned earlier, mainly on ethics reform. We're in a very, very, very challenging time.
Well, let's come to that in a sec. In terms of the economic situation, I was looking at a report the comptroller issued in the last couple of days and used words that you don't usually see in a fiscal document of this type. I mean, the word was, monumental economic challenges, great economic uncertainty, and said this could be the worst of Illinois' fiscal woes lie ahead. Where do you see things standing on the budget front? Obviously, a lot of funds were borrowed from the Federal Reserve to patch together a budget in May. How serious is the fiscal situation, particularly as we look ahead about the state budget going forward next year?
It's very serious, and it was just to give some context. When we negotiated that budget last year in 2019, we were in good shape. And we were looking at approximately $1 billion surplus back in January and February. Then, the bottom dropped out. So my concern was that the governor went in with his budget address before COVID hit, and he stated that he wanted a $42 billion spending plan in his budget, which is $2 billion more than the previous year. And I'm like, where are you going to come up with that, Governor? And he had banked his fair tax changes into that number. And I'm like, Governor, you can't base a budget on hypothetical revenues on a question which we're not sure if it's going to pass. And I don't think that that's responsible budgeting. So that went aside, and we went back in May, and I'm like, all right, we have been able to get a picture from our economic force, from the Commission on COGFA, Commission on Government Forecasting, and also GOMB. We're looking at probably on the best side, maybe $38 billion of revenue, which is going to be a shortfall of maybe $2.5 billion from the previous year. But the problem is the governor's stuck with his original budget proposal of $42 billion, which left a hole of about $4 to $5 billion. He was going to borrow the money, which he did, from the Federal Reserve, but that would be paid back on the hope that the Congress would be able to come up with a new stimulus package to be able to cover the debt that was taken out to pay for the Federal Reserve. So again, there's no certainty that, and as of today, I think the Senate and the House in Washington are very far apart on how we're going to be able to, for the next round of stimulus, particularly for state and local governments. So with having a $42 billion spending program that is looking at about a $4 to $5 billion deficit, wasn't responsible. The governor and the speaker asked us if we would support the budget. I said, if we're going to start with the $42 billion spending program, don't expect the Republicans to be part of that. I will just say this. People have been critical of the Governor Rauner, his predecessor, but it was Mike Madigan who passed budgets for Governor Rauner that were $3 and $7 billion out of balance. And when you do that, you create deficits. So we're looking at, again, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to repay that $5 billion that was taken out unless the feds come back and bail us out on that, but I don't expect that anytime soon. So we're running a deficit. We should not have spent at that level that the governor asked for, plain and simple. You don't ask for more spending when you are in an economic downturn. And that is my biggest fault with the governor and how he's handled this, the economics of the state during this crisis. When we had $40 billion to spend in the previous year's budget, no one was complaining. We were able to take care of so many needs in Illinois. Where he came up with the additional spending, I'm still confused with, but he should have pulled back and lived within the reality of what we had financially. If we were able to say that we're going to stick with the previous year's spending, we have $38 billion. There's some things that we could have done, some cuts, some readjustments with numbers to narrow that gap. We could have, there's a lot of other things that we could have done, but the Democrat majority failed to take that on. And I'm sounding partisan right now, but the fact is you can't spend $42 billion when you only have $38 billion in the bank.
What is you mentioned the fair tax or the progressive income tax constitutional amendment. How do you see that debate unfolding? It seems like, because of COVID and the, economic distress, that debate really hasn't been joined. How do you think it's going to be resolved in November?
We're going to find out. There's a lot of money that's going to be spent on both sides. The governor is making a major investment of his own money to promote the passage of the fair tax. There is a group that is countering it, that is starting the process of spending a lot of money to say that this is not responsible. I voted against it. I don't think it's the right thing to do. I think that our job is to, instead of asking for more money, particularly on high earners and also small businessmen and women who file their taxes based on their gross proceeds from their business, it unfairly attacks them. But our budget problems can be resolved by negotiation and also doing something with our public pensions, but they don't want to touch that. So we have a tax question on the ballot. It sounds nice and easy. Let's beat up on the rich guys, but it's just not the rich guys. It's the small businessmen and women who pay individually through their businesses, the pass-through businesses that they have that'll be affected by this. And that's the really unfair part of this, is that they did not exempt the small businessmen and the small business people who file. I think it's under I forgot the IRS code. So it's been complicated recently because of the scandal that is occurring right now with the FBI and Speaker Madigan over the ComEd scheme to bribe him. That is, I think, starting to penetrate into voters. That are we going to give Democrats that ability to spend more money when they are caught up in a scandal? And also, this is public record, but the Chicago newspapers a week and a half ago indicated that the governor is currently under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the property tax fraud. So that complicates the message. You're asking for more tax money from citizens, but the people who are asking for that money are currently being scrutinized for their own personal behaviors in the way in which they're operating. So some people think it's not fair, but this is politics, and the actions by the U.S. Attorney on the ComEd matter, and also with the property tax issues for the governor, are fair game. And here's another thing that came up recently that I think is going to complicate it. As we know in Illinois, state retirees do not pay a state income tax on their retirement benefits. State treasurer about a month and a half ago had comments stated that this is an opening, the fair tax is an opening for a tax on retirement income. That did not go over very well. So I would say that if the question was asked today, it would not meet the 60% threshold. I think people right now are worried about the money that they have, and I don't believe they can trust Springfield that they are going to follow through and be able to pay off deficits and to put Illinois in a better fiscal position by changing the tax code. I haven't seen evidence. I've seen a lot of polling on it right now. It's not a 50% plus one. It's a 60% threshold that they have to meet to be able to win that question. Nothing that I've seen to date has shown that it is going to meet that threshold, but there's going to be a very vigorous counter argument to the governor's proposal. And we'll see that play out, and I'm already seeing it at the moment. So I don't support it. I'd rather see us reform government internally by being more, exercising more restraint on our spending. But also, nobody likes to talk about dealing with pensions, but it is becoming one of the single largest expenditures in state government. Out of this year's budget, $9 billion is going towards our pension systems. $9 billion. It's quickly, within a few years, it may surpass our spending on K through 12 and public safety. And that's just not right. We can be fair. We have to negotiate a resolution. We have to deal with our pension systems at some point. They are going to run out of money. We have an obligation to the annuitants and also future retirees to ensure that the defined benefit will be there for them. But the way that the current system is made up, it's not solving our problems. The expenses are getting even stronger. And the state of Illinois, the dedication of state revenue towards our public pension systems is too much. We can't allow that to happen for the taxpayers, but also it's not fair for people who paid into the system. We have to be able to make another run back at the court systems, and it should be negotiated. And I would hope that the AFL-CIO would sit down at the table with us, and I hope the governor starts thinking that we have to deal with our pensions at the same time. So I got off track with it. So,
well, Mr. Williams, you've spoken about the speaker several times, and you made headlines a few weeks ago, 10 days ago or so, when you called on him to resign. Correct. Tell me about the evolution you're thinking, because the initial statement was saying was a little short of that, and then you stepped forward and said it was
if the charges are true that he should step down. So this was made immediately after the announcement of the charges against Commonwealth Edison. I've spent, since the day in which this information came out, I really spent a considerable amount of time reading through the deferred prosecution agreement and the statement of facts, which are very, very lengthy, a little bit challenging to go through because all the players are identified by a name or a number. So I started connecting the dots of individuals, and the more and more I read about it, the more and more that I found it troubling that there was a publicly held corporation, the largest utility in the state of Illinois, was actively and admitted to a bribery scheme to benefit the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Speaker Madigan, in exchange for favorable treatment in Illinois, in the Illinois legislature. This is not a document you read once. You need to read it a few times, but the scope and the breadth of it were so troubling. And as I started, and a week and a half ago, before I changed my view and I asked for his resignation, ComEd was in the Commonwealth Edison Corporation, was in the federal court as a defendant. I haven't seen a corporate defendant in a federal courthouse since Arthur Anderson. And it really was a stunning moment for me that we've gotten this far, and that Commonwealth Edison was admitting to every one of the facts that are contained in the charging document in the statement of facts. And then there was the ICC hearing last week, and I just felt that, you know what, I've heard enough. I've heard enough. And at that point, I changed my attitude, because reading through and really spending time reading through that charging document changed my attitudes. But this is not something that was an indictment, which if the facts are established to be true, that, you know, how you do it in a regular criminal case. These were actual facts that were admitted to by Commonwealth Edison of doing. And that is a very, very troubling moment for the institution that we serve. And we have our own code of ethics that's separate from what happens in a federal courthouse or any criminal courthouse. We have to live by the highest standards. And when you exercise, and when the Speaker of the House has so much authority by our House rules and by the Constitution, and when I look at that authority and I match it up with what had happened and what I have established to be true in that federal charging document, I came to the conclusion that the Speaker no longer has the capacity and no longer should serve in the House of Representatives, period. I am disgusted by what happened. I'm embarrassed for Illinois, and I am more saddened of what has happened to our institution. I had to make a statement, and I had nothing to do. I back it up. I stand by it, even more so now.
What do you think is going to happen? How do you see this playing out over the next couple of months?
Well, you know, in my resolution, I've asked for him to step down and also resign his position in the House of Representatives. I have 43 Republican members who are co-sponsors. We have, on any given day, up to 10 Democrats who have now signaled that they do not, that they want the Speaker to step down. I've gone further and asked him to resign from the House of Representatives. This is a very fluid situation, and it's really upon the Democrat members in the House of Representatives to decide whether or not they want to continue on with the leadership of Michael Madigan in light of what has been a proven and has been admitted to by Commonwealth Edison, a publicly held corporation that serves, you know, a good portion of the state of Illinois for electrical delivery. So I'm prepared to go down to Springfield, put votes on the board for a new member to run the chamber, but I've run out of patience. We have to clean house, so to speak, but we have a higher obligation within the House of Representatives to operate at the highest ethical standards. And again, this is not this is much more than a charging document. These are statements of fact that have been admitted to by a publicly held corporation, and I'm not going to tolerate it. So I will say this, that a lot of it depends on what the U.S. Attorney's Office does over the next few months. I can't predict how things are going to be tomorrow or the day after, but it is not a good moment for the chamber. I think it's we have an obligation to do what we were sworn in to do, and right now I think there's a lot of confusion, and I hope that the Democrats do some soul searching about what they're about. And I had a press conference yesterday about this, and a lot of the Democrats who are running for re-election are, I mean, this is comical, but many of them in these mail pieces that I talked about yesterday said they're going back to Springfield to root out corruption and get rid of the bad players in Illinois government, but it's paid for by Mike Madigan's committee, these mail pieces. So it's become a campaign, but my interest is the integrity of the chamber. And I believe that we're at that point where we have to make a change. I don't want to wait till next election or next January for a new selection of a speaker. This needs to happen immediately. I've asked for the speaker to step down. He needs to concentrate on his own affairs, but he cannot run this chamber and the House of Representatives. And I believe that we're past that point. So John, I think it's just really a matter of how the Democrat members of his caucus are going to handle this. Many of them are going to just look the other direction and say that, you know what, he hasn't been charged with anything. He hasn't been found guilty of anything. I'm not held, and we've never been held by that standard. We impeached a sitting governor who had not been, before he was ever tried or convicted. We threw out and removed a member of the House of Representatives some 8 years ago, a West Side Democrat, for taking a bribe from an FBI officer before he was ever went to trial, was ever convicted. We're not held to that same standard. Our standard is what we believe is the right thing to do to maintain the ethical standards that we have at a higher level to serve in this capacity.
Well, let's talk for just a second about the fall campaign that is really upon us. I mean, first of all, logistically, given COVID, are you able to travel around the state and go to events, or is it just, are you living on Zoom? And also, for years, Republicans have run their campaigns largely against the speaker. How are you going to balance that? And I presume that's going to continue with laying out your own alternative vision of how Illinois should be managed.
Well, starting with, I've been raising money by Zooms. I've been doing all sorts of meetings by Zoom, and we're doing this today by Zoom. But I need to get back out into the field and back into the areas. I drove down to Oakville, Illinois, last week, and I'm not sure if you know where that's at in Washington County. It's at a fundraiser. I'll be in Peoria, your roots, in a few days. I'm going to be spending more time on the road, getting in front of editorial boards, talking to different groups about what's at stake and why it's important that we need this. If there ever was a time to bring checks and balances to the House of Representatives, it's right now. Democrats have 73 members, and we need to remove 4 of them to be able to take Mike Madigan or whoever is going to be, if somebody takes over for him, take him out of that supermajority. Right now, it's the Democrats. It's a clean slate. They get whatever they want in the legislature, and I can't say it's really good. Having checks and balances means having Republicans winning more seats. It's going to force compromise, and that's something which I think I gave you some examples of what I am. A person. I'm pragmatic. I want to find responses to the most difficult questions. Democrats have not taken on those difficult questions, and I think we have to do it. And I'm not worried about the consequences of it. I mentioned pensions earlier. We have to deal with that. We can no longer have our head in the sand on it. So I'm going to be out on the road. I'm going to be campaigning, raising money. That is all picked up a lot. The interest in the House Republicans has picked up a lot last week. We've got to be able to figure out the messaging. We have a president that's wildly popular in different parts of the state. In some areas, not so popular. So we have to be able to have a very a laser-focused campaign for members to talk about who they are, what their relationship with the speaker is, and how they plan to be supported by him financially moving forward. But the speaker is going to be front and center. He has been. He should expect it. But these are the consequences of being in this public life. And so I can only hope that, as we move along, that there is going to be an awakening of Illinois citizens to understand that in Springfield, in the House of Representatives and the Senate, we do more to affect the day-to-day lives of Illinoisans than our friends in Congress. And I hope people will understand it. It's my job just to be able to, I got the guy doing the work outside, but it's my job to be able to develop that message and to ensure that there is a voice. There's a voice out there for people in the state of Illinois who want to see, they want to see a better investment of their dollars. They want to make sure that the state government is operating and spending responsibly with austerity. Because as I said earlier, when you have $38 billion of revenue coming in and you're spending 42, you can't get away with that in the business. You can't get away with that in your house, but we get away with it in Springfield. But I will say this, John, this is going to be a campaign that will be like anything other, based on what is happening on the national scene with COVID, and also with what's happening in state government right now. We're going to have campaigns that are going to be extremely reliant upon absentee early voting, and that is what we are making an investment right now, and I think everybody is. Because I don't know whether or not in November people will feel comfortable going back out and doing their traditional voting in their precincts. I think people should still have their option of doing that. People have always had the option to vote by mail, but I will think that there will be a greater focus upon absentee early voting this time. And we've got to be able, and that's where we lost a lot of it last cycle. Democrats did a better job than us, and we learned a little bit from that. We lost a lot of seats in DuPage County, a lot of them by less than 1 point. So we've got to, and a lot of it was because of the early voting. So.
Well, let's end on a light note. I was looking at your website and I noted that you have an event this weekend pertaining to lizards and reptiles, some kind of virtual event. Tell us about that.
Well, every year, yeah, and it's not in the House of Representatives either. We don't go back in a session until November, so those lizards and reptiles will still be there. But every year, myself and my state senator, we do a kids event, and we bring in the Brookfield Zoo to bring in their ambassadors, which are really fascinating animals. So we couldn't do it this year. So myself and my senator, we went to the zoo and we taped meeting with these different animals and talked with the keepers, and so that's really it. So we're doing it by it's a video that's going to be myself and Senator John Curran, who are at the zoo talking with the zoo employees about these different animals and where they're from and what they're, the type of species they are, the part of the world they're from. So that's there was a lot of jokes that I had in talking about similarities between state government, but also the other the reptiles that are in the Brookfield Zoo, as we read about more and more. So so those are the things. Part of I would say 90% of the job is being present, coming to events. And I get more calls from people, it's not political stuff, but people who just need help. And my job is to be able to cut through some of the red tape. So we do, I would say, like I said, 90% of the job is just helping people just get from A to B, and also providing some services and doing events that people really enjoy. I did a recycling event over the weekend, which was incredibly popular, but those are little things that people look forward to. And so I will just say that I'm blessed to be in this position. I'm honored. I serve at the will of my colleagues, and I strive to do what I think is right every day. And I hope that we can, as my father would say, leave a place better than you found it. And I keep that in mind when I go down to Springfield about making the tough decisions, because sometimes the tough decisions are not popular. I know that, but I'm willing to take that risk. I've done that before, and I will be as long as I'm down there.
Great. Well, Leader Durkin, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it, and stay well on the campaign trail. And we look forward to hosting you down in Carbondale sometime soon when travel permits. So thank you so much.
I need some 7th City barbecue. So I'll be 7th Street? 7th Street.
17th Street, yeah.
17, all right, I'm over 3. Oh boy, 17th Street, yeah. All right, I should have wrote that down. But anyway, it's very good, and I plan to having it, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for watching another edition of Understanding Our New World. Please feel free to continue to follow us on social media. And thank you for your continuing support, which allows us to keep the legacy of Paul Simon alive and well. Thank you so much.